Hello, I'm going to be doing my presentation on Meredith Grey. So, who is Meredith Grey? Meredith Grey is the main character of Grey's Anatomy. The show follows her life from becoming a medical intern to ultimately becoming a world-renowned surgeon. Throughout the show, she goes through many different kinds of complex relationships, high stakes surgeries, and even profound personal loss. Through it all, though, she remains a compelling and resilient figure, making her personality very interesting to analyze. Firstly, I want to talk about one trait that she has in her personality, that being neuroticism. So, what is neuroticism? This is a trait that basically measures a person's emotional stability. Those who are high in this trait, as Meredith Grey is, are considered to have a sort of reverse or like inverse emotional stability. They tend to have or tend to experience more negative emotions such as anxiety, sadness, irritability, and self doubt. Those high in this trait can also be emotionally reactive and more sensitive to stress or perceived threats. One way to look at neuroticism is through the biological view. This perspective ties neuroticism to many explanations, but two of which being structures of the brain, such as the amygdala and the right prefrontal cortex, and also neurotransmitters such as GABA and neuroepinephrine. But these are very hard to determine from a character on a show. We can't look inside of Meredith Grey's brain, and we also can't really measure or look at the levels of these neurotransmitters. So, a sort of more concrete way to look at it from a biological view is the behavioral inhibition system. Both these structures and these neurotransmitters play a part in this system, so you can see that sort of direct link. The system is seen as sort of a psychological brake pedal. When people are presented or cued with some sort of threat of like punishment or danger, um, they tend to withdraw or try to avoid that situation. And it leads individuals who tend to, use the system more to be cautious and more attentive to potential dangers. So it can make you just more aware, and it can also protect you in a lot of ways. Those who are overactive in it, though, it can also lead to heightened anxiety, rumination, and withdrawal. A very interesting example from the show um, that I want to talk about is how sort of the many negative experiences had in her life, from, shooters in the hospital to bomb threats to plane crashes, have all had an effect of bolstering or sort of making her behavioral inhibition system sort of work overtime. And this affects many different aspects of her life and ways that she begins to view these aspects from a more sort of avoidance viewpoint. Specifically, it affects her ability to form new relationships. A very interesting example would be her relationship with her half sister, Maggie. For context, earlier in the show, another one of her sisters named Lexi died in a plane crash that Meredith was also a part of. And this caused her a great deal of pain. Meredith was very distraught and it caused a lot of grief. And so when her new sister, Maggie, comes into the picture, she initially avoids or sort of withdraws from that relationship to protect herself. And she also engages in a lot of different sort of neurotic behaviors. She is very anxious about the relationships. She tends to think and overthink that relationship. Um, and so that's sort of one sort of concrete example of how this overactive behavioral inhibition system um, leads to neuroticism. The next thing I want to talk about is how Meredith Grey is a satisficer. Satisficers are individuals who pick the very first option that is presented to them that meets a certain standard, as opposed to those who tend to look for maybe the perfect or the best option. This standard tends to be um, quote unquote good enough. And so these satisficers compare the presented options to this good enough. And the very first option that meets that standard, they will pick. It does lead to very quick and efficient decisions. So, in that way, it can be very beneficial in the sense that people who are satisficers tend to be happier, have higher life satisfaction, um, and also more. A way to sort of look through and figure out sort of where this um, idea comes from is from the humanistic view. In the humanistic view, we have an idea of these construals. So when we experience things, we categorize them based off of the construals that we have. They can be very broad, so maybe like the idea of good, the idea of bad, or they can be very specific, as in some very specific situation, and we categorize new things into these ideas to sort of make sense of what we are experiencing. E- Whether they are broad or specific, though, they do impact our ability to make decisions and how we understand new situations. Um, Moving past that, a construct theory was developed by Kelly in which people use these construals that they have in the ways in which they view the world, and they sort of make them into personal constructs. These constructs are dichotomized ideas of either or, so like stable versus unstable, success versus failure. Um, a very explicit example is the idea of satisficers versus maximizers. Um, these are two sort of opposite ends, although this view does still say that you can, you know, use the opposite end. So even if you tend to be a satisficer, in certain situations, you can change your mindset, you can change your construals or your personal constructs and the way you think to still be a maximizer. So you're not stuck in your view, but you tend to make decisions based out of that. A good example of why she is a satisficer is through the many choices she makes, whether that be her career or her personal life. I'm going to focus on her career. In her career as even at the very beginning, as a intern, she almost immediately picks neurosurgery. She hadn't even tried most of the other specialties, and I think she might have only done one beforehand, if I remember correctly. And she just immediately picks neurosurgery. And then even later in the show, when neurosurgery becomes no longer an option, she does the exact same thing and picks general surgery. So you can see that in this case, she has this standard. So what she likes in a specialty, and once she finds that, she will just pick it rather than testing out every single other option. The last aspect that I want to talk about is an avoidant attachment. An attachment is an emotional bond which is formed early in childhood. This is usually between a responsive caregiver or mother, and it creates a secure base for the child and a secure attachment for that child to grow. But when caregivers are unresponsive or neglectful or even abusive, the child can develop an insecure attachment. This can be either avoidant or ambivalent, but in either case, these styles sort of shape how we approach relationships throughout our entire life. In childhood, those with an avoidant attachment style learn to suppress their emotional needs and to avoid closeness, due to the fact that their caregivers tend to not be very much emotionally responsive. So they don't come to expect much from their caregiver, so they will suppress their own needs. The Neo-Freudians, specifically Mary Ainsworth, looked at this through her strange situation experiment, which looked at attachment styles. They looked at interactions between caregivers and children when first separated and then reunited. And they sort of categorized the responses of children into secure, ambivalent, or avoidant. For specifically those children who were having an avoidant attachment, they were unbothered by the separation, meaning they were used to being left alone or not cared for, and also indifferent to the return of the caregiver, meaning that they don't come to expect any sort of warmth or responsiveness from the caregiver. And this can lead the children to ultimately avoiding the caregiver, not really acknowledging their presence. This is an example of this. For context, in the middle of the screen here is Meredith's mother. Her mother had been very neglectful and just really unresponsive to her as a child, leaving her alone a lot to focus on her career and just being overall a very just neglectful mother. In this scene, her mother, who had recently been diagnosed with Alzheimer's, comes into the hospital after getting injured, and Meredith is confronted by her mother coming into her workspace.
The patient's name is Steve. You're complaining of Benjamin cramping pain and diarrhea. Also suffers from that. Alzheimer's. Patient's name. Yang, patient's name. What the hell are you doing here? Haven't I told you? How many times have I told you not to bother me when I'm at work? Alice Gray.
Meredith's mother.
You're amateurs. You're amateurs.
So, as you can see, um, as just with children who have an avoidant attachment style, tend to avoid and just not acknowledge the caregiver when they return, even in, her early 20s, Meredith shows these same exact qualities, which is very interesting. Sorry if you could see my YouTube videos. But you can see the like withdrawing from her mother, sort of just not acknowledging it and sort of backing away, which is seen a lot with children who have these avoidant attachment style. I also think it's important to talk about the fact that avoidant attachment, like I've shown here, also affects those in adulthood. Um, just like with Meredith, those in adulthood who have an avoidant attachment tend to be independent, guarded, and sometimes uncomfortable with intimacy. And as you've seen here, can withdraw emotionally during conflict or stress. And so, lastly, in conclusion, we've looked at three aspects of Meredith Gray's personality. First, we looked at neuroticism, then we looked at the fact that she's a satisfier, and lastly, that she has an avoidant attachment style. By looking at these aspects of her personality, we see that she is multifaceted. She is not a one-dimensional character. She's gone through a lot of pain, but she's also gone through a lot of happy moments. It's a 20 plus season show, and so you really get to see so many different sides of her and her personality develop over time. And I really appreciated that about her character. Her character is very dynamic, and we get to really see that. Thank you for listening.